My sister held my inhaler while I was fighting to breathe and laughed like it was some kind of joke. In that moment, I realized something painful. The person who should have cared about me the most was the one who enjoyed seeing me suffer. I always believed family was meant to protect you, stand by you, and help you when you're at your weakest. But that day showed me that not every bond is safe, and not every sister is a real sister at heart. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lara, and for most of my life, I tried to believe that my sister, Tessa, had a good side hidden somewhere. I gave her chance after chance, hoping she would treat me with the kindness you expect from someone you grew up with. But she never did. She always pushed me down, made fun of me, and acted like my struggles were entertainment. I thought things would get better once we grew up, but the truth is, some people don't change. They just learn how to hide their cruelty better. The day she mocked my asthma attack wasn't the first time she hurt me, but it was the moment that finally woke me up. When you're gasping for air and the person standing over you enjoys your fear, something inside you breaks. And once it breaks, you can't pretend anymore. This story isn't just about pain. It's about finally standing up, taking back power, and making sure someone like Tessa never hurts you again. I grew up in a small town with my parents and my older sister, Tessa Quinlan. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. Inside the house, things were very different. Tessa and I were close in age, but she always acted like she was above me. Even when we were little, she had a way of taking over everything. If I picked a toy, she wanted it. If I learned something new, she needed to do it better. It never felt like simple competition. It felt like she couldn't stand the idea of me having anything she didn't control. My parents believed she was just a strong personality, so they didn't see what I saw. They didn't notice the small comments she whispered when no one else was around. They didn't notice how she pushed her way into every part of my life. When we played with other kids, she always tried to decide what I could or couldn't do. If someone complimented me, she would find a way to turn the attention back to herself. As we grew older, her behavior didn't fade. It changed into something sharper. She didn't shout or fight. She used quiet pressure, small digs, and calculated moves that left me feeling smaller every time. There were moments when she made me doubt my own abilities, like she enjoyed watching me question myself. I tried to brush it off, telling myself all sisters argued, but deep down I knew this wasn't normal. The hardest part was how natural it seemed for her. There was no hesitation, no guilt, only a steady need to remind me where she believed I belonged. Even before anything serious happened, the pattern was already there. I just didn't understand how far she would eventually take it. The attack happened on a warm afternoon when the air felt heavier than usual. I had been cleaning the hallway when a tightness began rising in my chest. At first, it felt like a small squeeze, something I could manage, but within seconds it grew sharper. My breath shortened, turning thin and quick. I reached for my inhaler on the table, only to find the spot empty. Panic rushed in faster than the lack of air. I looked around, fighting to pull in even the smallest breath. My throat felt like it was closing, and my ribs hurt each time I tried to inhale. I knew I needed the inhaler immediately before the attack became dangerous. That's when I saw Tessa standing near the doorway, holding the inhaler loosely in her hand. She wasn't rushing toward me, wasn't showing concern. She tilted her head, watching me with a strange amusement, like she was observing something mildly entertaining. I tried to call out, but the sound barely escaped my mouth. My vision blurred as oxygen slipped away. My hand shook, reaching toward her. She lifted the inhaler slightly, as if showing it off, and made a light comment about how dramatic I looked. There was a coldness in her tone that cut deeper than the lack of air. I dropped to my knees, chest burning, ears ringing. I could hear her footsteps, but they weren't coming closer. Each second felt longer than the last. My lungs fought desperately, pulling nothing in. I felt lightheaded, struggling to stay conscious. She finally tossed the inhaler onto the floor near me, not with urgency but with indifference. I crawled toward it with what little strength I had left, knowing that if I didn't reach it in time, I might not get another chance. When the attack finally passed, I was still weak and shaking. I managed to steady myself enough to walk to the living room, where my parents were sitting. I expected concern, maybe questions, something that showed they understood how close I had been to collapsing. Instead, they barely looked up when I tried to explain what had happened. I told them I couldn't breathe, that the inhaler wasn't where it should have been, that I had struggled to reach it. My voice trembled, not from fear anymore but from disbelief. Harold brushed it off with a simple line about me overreacting again. June said I needed to stay calm next time, as if calmness could replace air in my lungs. I tried again, hoping they would listen if I spoke slower, but neither of them took the situation seriously. They didn't ask why the inhaler had been moved. They didn't ask why I was still unsteady. They treated it like a small inconvenience instead of something that could have turned deadly. Tessa walked in while I was still trying to make them understand. She wore a slight smirk, almost hidden, but not enough for me to miss it. She leaned against the doorway like nothing unusual had happened. Every time our eyes met, she let that smug expression linger just long enough to make sure I saw it. My parents didn't notice. They were too distracted by their own assumptions. Their dismissal cut deeper than I expected. I felt completely alone, as if the people who were supposed to protect me had chosen not to see the truth standing right in front of them. Tessa didn't need to say anything. The quiet satisfaction on her face told me everything. I realized then that I couldn't rely on anyone else to stop her. I would have to stand up for myself, even if no one believed me. The hours after the incident felt strangely quiet, yet everything inside me was loud. My mind kept replaying every moment, not just the attack itself but the way everyone brushed it aside. A heavy mix of emotions settled in my chest. I felt shaken, not only because I had struggled to breathe, but because the people I trusted didn't seem to care. It was a hollow kind of pain, one that made the house feel unfamiliar. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. A deep sting followed every thought. I kept wondering how someone who shared my blood could watch me fight for air and feel nothing. That question wouldn't leave me. It twisted into something sharper the longer I stayed with it. I wasn't just upset anymore. Something inside me was shifting. I started thinking about the past, moments I had brushed aside, times I had convinced myself she didn't mean harm. Now each memory felt different, as if a curtain had lifted and I was finally seeing things clearly. The truth hit me harder than the attack: she enjoyed having power over me. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. That realization created a new kind of fire in me. Hurt slowly turned into resolve. I couldn't let her continue deciding how my life went. I couldn't stay silent while she kept pushing boundaries, pretending everything was fine on the surface. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. I didn't argue or confront her. I kept every thought to myself, letting the anger settle into something steady. Deep down, a promise formed. She was not going to walk away from what she had done. Not this time. I began noticing details I had ignored before. Small comments from relatives, quiet complaints from people who had known Tessa longer than I realized. One evening, while visiting my aunt, I overheard her mention how our cousin May once stopped coming around because someone kept twisting her words and turning friends against her. She didn't say a name, but the tone made it clear. My stomach tightened. I asked a few gentle questions, pretending I was simply curious, and the pieces fell into place. Later, an old friend of Tessa's stopped by our house to drop off something she had borrowed months earlier. She avoided eye contact with Tessa completely. When Tessa left the room, the girl quietly told me she wouldn't have returned if she hadn't needed to. She said she learned her lesson after trusting the wrong person. Her voice carried the same uneasy edge I had come to recognize. It wasn't anger, it was fear mixed with regret. The more I listened, the more patterns I found. People didn't drift away from her, they escaped her. Each new discovery pushed a weight deeper into my chest. What happened to me wasn't an isolated moment. It was part of something she had done to others again and again. That changed everything. I stopped waiting for someone else to notice. I started keeping track of the little things, the way she spoke to people when no one else paid attention, the stories she twisted, the plans she sabotaged. I wrote down dates, details, conversations. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just careful notes that only I knew existed. For the first time, I felt like I had a direction. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. Each entry in my notebook felt like reclaiming a small piece of control she had taken from me for years. I reached a point where gathering information wasn't enough. I needed a plan that didn't rely on emotions or hope. I wanted something solid, something that couldn't be brushed aside the way my parents had dismissed everything else. That's when I decided I needed professional help. I searched quietly, avoiding any trace that could lead back to me, until I found someone who specialized in cases involving repeated harm within families. His name was Evan Calloway, a lawyer known for being patient but relentless. The first time I sat across from him, my hands felt cold, but my voice stayed steady. I explained only what he needed to hear, keeping my tone even, refusing to let the anger show. He listened closely, taking notes, asking questions that made me realize how much deeper this situation could go. He didn't react with shock or disbelief. Instead, he treated every detail as important, which felt like the first real validation I had received. Once he understood the pattern, he laid out what would be required to move forward. He taught me which moments mattered, what kind of proof could hold weight, and how to protect myself legally. It wasn't about rushing. It was about precision. Every step needed to be thought through, every action documented correctly. I followed his guidance carefully. I organized everything I had collected, adding new observations with a calmness that surprised even me. On the outside, I kept my routine the same, speaking to Tessa normally, acting as if nothing had changed. Inside, however, a different energy grew, focused, steady, and sharper than any anger I had felt before. The more progress we made, the clearer it became, this wasn't just about confronting her. It was about making sure she faced consequences she couldn't escape. I didn't jump into anything dramatic. That wasn't the point. I wanted her to feel a shift she couldn't quite name. So I began with small steps, nothing that could be traced back to me, nothing loud enough to draw attention. It started with correcting her stories when she tried to twist them in front of others. I didn't accuse her, I simply added the truth at the right moment. The confusion on her face each time was subtle, but it showed she wasn't used to being challenged. When she tried to take credit for tasks she hadn't done, I made sure the right people heard the real version. Again, not directly, just quiet comments placed where they mattered. It wasn't spiteful, it was deliberate. I let her feel the discomfort of being questioned, something she rarely experienced. A few of her coworkers began noticing the inconsistencies in her explanations. They weren't confrontational, but their raised eyebrows said enough. At home, I changed the pattern she relied on. If she left chores for me, I didn't finish them. If she expected me to step aside during conversations, I held my ground. None of it was aggressive. It was simply me refusing to shrink. She felt the difference, though she didn't know why it unsettled her. There were financial moments too. When she forgot due dates or ignored small responsibilities, I let the natural consequences hit. I didn't cover for her, didn't remind her, didn't cushion anything. Late fees and awkward calls from service providers landed squarely on her. The most effective moments were social. When she tried to impress someone with exaggerated claims, I asked harmless questions that exposed the gaps. The embarrassment that followed was mild, but enough to shake her confidence. Each small shift created a ripple. She stayed irritated, off balance, unsure why things weren't aligning the way they used to. And while she struggled to regain control, I kept moving forward, knowing these early cracks would matter later. The closer we moved toward taking action, the more the atmosphere in the house shifted. I continued meeting with Evan in quiet places, bringing him organized records, dates, and statements that lined up perfectly. Each time we spoke, he grew more confident that the case was solid. There were no gaps, no loose threads, nothing she could twist to her advantage. Everything had been documented with care, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. While I stayed steady, Tessa carried herself with the same boldness she always had. She walked around as if nothing in the world could touch her. She dismissed every small setback as bad luck, never considering that the consequences building around her might have a direction. She was certain that she could talk her way out of anything. That confidence blinded her completely. My parents began picking up on the tension. They noticed the short pauses during family dinners, the way I didn't back down when she spoke sharply, and the way she reacted with irritation every time things didn't go her way. They couldn't pinpoint the cause, but they sensed the shift. Harold asked if everything was fine between us. June watched our interactions carefully, like she was trying to catch something hidden. Neither of them understood that this wasn't about rivalry anymore. This was about responsibility. As the legal preparations neared their final stage, Evan guided me through what would happen next. His calm manner helped me hold my emotions in place. I didn't allow anger to show, didn't reveal the steps already set in motion. I kept my expression neutral while she carried on with the same superiority she'd always worn. She had no idea a court date was coming. No idea the evidence stacked against her was enough to challenge every lie she relied on. She believed she was untouchable. That belief was exactly what made everything fall into place. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, the kind of chill that settles in your spine when you realize there is no turning back. I sat beside Evan, my hands steady, my breathing calm. Across the room, Tessa walked in with the same self-assured stride she always carried. She didn't look nervous. She didn't think she needed to be. That confidence wavered only slightly when she noticed the stack of documents on our table. When the hearing began, Evan guided me through each step. We introduced the timeline first, laying out earlier incidents involving people she had pushed aside or misled. Each example connected smoothly to the next, forming a pattern that was difficult to dismiss. The judge listened closely, eyebrows raised more than once as he read through the files. Then came the moment I feared and prepared for, the account of the attack. Evan presented my medical reports, statements from the neighbor who heard me struggling, and the details from the evaluation after the incident. As the information unfolded, the room grew heavier. No one spoke. Even the jurors leaned forward, their expressions tightening. When Tessa's turn came to respond, her voice no longer carried that same sharp confidence. She tried to explain, using excuses that once worked on everyone else. But each explanation fell apart when Evan revealed another note, another date, another confirmation that contradicted her words. She looked around the room, waiting for someone to back her up. No one did. Her posture shifted as the questioning continued. First, she tapped her foot. Then her hands trembled slightly as she tried to keep her composure. By the time Evan showed the final evidence, a recorded statement from someone she had pressured in the past, her expression cracked completely. The judge called for a short recess, but the outcome was already clear. For the first time, she realized her control was gone, and the truth she'd buried for years was laid bare for everyone to see. By the time the hearing resumed, Tessa's earlier composure had vanished. She fidgeted in her chair, eyes darting between the documents and the people around her. Each new detail we presented seemed to chip away at the confidence she had relied on for so long. Her lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tightening, as though holding back words that had no meaning anymore. When Evan confronted her with inconsistencies in her statements, I noticed the small tremor in her hands. Her voice wavered when she tried to explain, cracking on words that once flowed easily. She swallowed hard, attempting to regain control, but the jury and the judge were already reading the shift in her demeanor. Every proud stance she had carried into the room had been replaced by tension and uncertainty. At one point, she tried to argue over a minor detail, but the calm precision of our documentation made her words feel hollow. The audience could see the gap between the person she projected and the truth that surrounded her. Murmurs ran quietly through the courtroom, and she glanced around, realizing no one would cover for her this time. Finally, a sigh escaped her as her shoulders slumped. Her head lowered, and she could no longer hide the embarrassment and fear that had built up over years of manipulation. The air around her seemed to tighten, and I could feel the weight of every carefully gathered note, every recorded inconsistency, pressing down on her. Watching her unravel, I felt a quiet relief settle over me. Not rage, not cruelty, just the satisfaction of seeing the balance shift. For once, she couldn't intimidate anyone, couldn't twist reality to her favor. The tables had turned completely, and in that moment, I understood the full power of preparation, patience, and perseverance. The final judgment arrived quietly but decisively. The judge ruled in my favor, granting protections I had long needed. Whether it was financial security, a restraining measure, or official acknowledgement of the harm I endured, the decision made it clear that the court recognized the truth. Tessa had no choice but to accept the outcome, and for the first time I felt a sense of permanence in my safety. Sitting in the courtroom after the announcement, a wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't just about winning, it was about reclaiming control over my own life. The fear that had clung to me for years began to fade. I could breathe easier, both physically and emotionally, knowing that her power over me was finally limited. The journey had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. I felt steadier, more confident in my judgment, and more aware of my own resilience. I realized that strength didn't always come from confrontation or anger, it could grow quietly, through careful observation, preparation, and persistence. I had learned to trust my instincts, to stand firm even when no one else believed me, and to act with patience and purpose. Seeing Tessa face the consequences while I remained composed reinforced something I had felt all along. Justice doesn't always arrive instantly, but it can be inevitable when the truth is clear and the facts are undeniable. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter. The chapters of fear, doubt, and betrayal were closing. I carried with me a newfound sense of freedom and empowerment. No one could dictate my life or intimidate me again. The experience had hardened me, but it also gave me clarity. I was finally free from the shadow of her toxicity, and I knew I would never allow anyone to control me like that again. Looking back, the path I walked felt like a storm I had to survive. Every memory of being undermined, every sting of humiliation, built the tension that pushed me forward. The heartbreak from someone I once trusted cut deep, but it also forced me to confront the reality of who Tessa really was. I had hoped for compassion or understanding, but in the absence of that, I discovered something more important, my own strength. The experience taught me to recognize boundaries and enforce them without guilt. I learned that protecting yourself doesn't make you cold or unkind, it makes you aware and prepared. Every step I took, from observing her patterns to preparing my case, was a lesson in patience, focus, and resilience. I discovered the quiet power that comes from being deliberate and composed, even when emotions are running high. I also realized that family ties don't automatically guarantee loyalty or protection. Blood alone cannot define the safety, trust, or respect you deserve. Standing up for yourself, especially when those closest to you fail to see the truth, is not just necessary, it is vital. Now, with the dust settled and her influence removed from my life, I feel a sense of calm I never thought possible. I am wiser, more cautious, and stronger than I was before. I carry the knowledge that betrayal doesn't have to break you, it can teach you to rise. The moral is simple: relationships, even with family, should never compromise your well-being. Protect yourself, trust your instincts, and never hesitate to stand firm. Strength, clarity, and justice often come from the courage to act, and sometimes the only way forward is to fight for the respect and dignity you have always deserved. Do you think I handled my sister the right way, or should I have tried to forgive her? I'm really curious about your thoughts, so share them in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and hit the bell.